our good friend Chris Woodward. Chris Woodward is the anchor and reporter for American Family News. Chris joins us for Beat the Press, where we review some of the stories of the week and interviews. Chris, welcome back.
Thank you. If you need something else to laugh at,
Yes.
our president has said more than one time in the past that he was a constitutional law lecturer.
It's good on many levels there, Chris. On many levels. I guess sometimes it's one of those things that sets me off, frankly, when somebody does because they called Reagan stupid, they called Bush stupid, and I guess the only way you're smart is if you raise taxes, increase regulation. If you can't pass something, just do it through executive order and break the law.
Right.
And surrender. I guess that's genius.
Yeah, and Seth does his show from kind of a liberal stronghold, so most of the people in the audience are already opposed to her, and maybe he's playing to the crowd or whatnot. But certainly, Jimmy Fallon has kind of taken a middle ground approach, at times at least, since he took over for the Tonight Show. So we're seeing a little difference there with Seth, I guess.
Maybe, yeah, and maybe. I also think of the audiences of The Daily Show or Real Time. I mean, you've got a bunch of leftist nut bars, quite frankly. And I'm not into name calling, but I am into accuracy. And if you look at what they support and, the loud cheering and, Sarah Palin's so stupid. They called Bush stupid. And I think it gave people, along with a very funny Will Ferrell, but with Bush is... Anybody who understood George W. Bush and was around him and worked in his inner circle, or you had discussions with what he believed and how he outlined it and his strategy or strategery, if you will, the guy is so far ahead of teleprompter, the community organizer himself, our president. Mm-hmm. And people say, you're name calling. No, that's accurate.
Yeah,
Bush. Look at Bush's last press conference. You want to see him without the restrictions of worrying about what to say. It flows. Mm-hmm. He's a very bright guy, and he thought
also,
a lot about it.
He speaks some Spanish as well, so he's actually on a list of multilingual presidents of the United States, according to one website I just pulled up.
Is there anything you are just a fountain of
Let me tell you, you can find anything you want to know by pressing the Google button on your internet machine.
I goggled it.
That's right.
Love it, man. But sincerely, Chris, it is great. And here's what it is. I think what I'm tired of is this surface idea of the characterizations and arguments being based on either what people have seen on Law and Order or SNL.
Right.
And it's just it's tired.
Yeah, I will say the mission was not accomplished when the chief executive landed on the ship and declared it so. But certainly, Bush has been attacked for his intelligence in the past, and that's certainly debatable.
And that was in context, quite frankly, the end of major combat operations in that way. And granted, it was the wrong move optically and in many ways, but he also did he land that? Yeah, he landed on
I
there?
think LBJ.
Yeah, he's a pilot.
Yeah, LBJ did
he's
a similar thing back in the day.
Yeah.
I think it was LBJ, and somebody brought that up in the coverage of Bush doing it. But I digress, as you would say.
Yes. Well, all right. So, Chris, I have to ask you about this because when I see Tom Freidman interviewing the President of the United States, I think, Showtime, baby. And here it was. It's on Showtime, and it's a program that Thomas Freidman is asking a one-on-one interview about climate change with the president. And I wanted to get your thoughts because in your former, you were a environmental reporter, business and environment reporter, right?
Yes.
So this is in your wheelhouse. Well, everything's in your wheelhouse, anchor, reporter. But here it is. Roll it.
At least once a day, you'll see something on the national security side or domestic policy side that is impacted in some fashion by the possibilities of climate change. The area where we are most concerned is how climate change could end up having profound national security implications in poorer countries. We're obviously concerned about drought in California or hurricanes and floods along our coastlines. All those things are bread and butter issues that touch on American families. But when you start seeing how these shifts can displace people, entire countries can be finding themselves unable to feed themselves. And the potential incidents of conflict that arises out of that, that gets your attention. There's a reason why the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff identified climate change as one of our most significant national security problems. It's not just the actual disasters that might arise. It is the accumulating stresses that are placed on a lot of different countries and the possibility of war, conflict, refugees, displacement that arise from changing climate.
So the years of living dangerously, which is the name of the show on Showtime, Tom Freidman.
Dramatic music.
Yeah, I was kind of captivated and frightened. So tell me, Chris, your thoughts on this excerpt of the interview between Thomas Freidman and our president identifying climate change as a concern of national security.
Well, a couple of things I took away from there. The dramatic music is meant to stir emotion, sort of like you see with a lot of news stories, not just those involving climate change, but they'll show a lot of things that look, bad, awful, terrible, whatever you want to call it, and they're talking about all these things. I don't have any numbers or stats to throw at you in the way of droughts and floods, but the president did mention hurricanes being a concern. He's talking, I assume, about hurricanes being a concern for the U.S., and if you look at the number of hurricanes that have made landfall in the U.S. since 2005, August 29th of 2005, when Hurricane Katrina made landfall, and Al Gore and a lot of people said these things are going to get worse as we get further into the future, we've actually seen less hurricanes make landfall in the U.S. Since 2005. And the president didn't mention this specifically, but I bring it up because we've just finished a tornado season. Some people and publications claim that tornadoes maybe are the result of climate change. I've actually talked with Catherine Hayhoe, who thinks climate change is real, it's bad, and it's going to get worse. Catherine Hayhoe has told me that you can't say that about tornadoes because it's an issue with the data and whatnot. Now, she does think droughts and floods are results of climate change and they're going to get worse. But certainly people out there are debating this and that, one thing or the other.
But they've decreased in recent years.
Hurricanes, yes.
Or droughts and wildfires, in fact. That's...
Mark Morano, Cal Beisner, some other folks have mentioned that, but definitely those two names that I've interviewed as well.
And I mean, that's one of the reasons. I mean, Chris, I do play this for you because I know this is part of the wheelhouse of business and environment. And you've interviewed all these great folks and you've done your own research. But what bothers me is he's not letting go of this, and there's a reason behind that. That said, let's play another clip from it because the music was, it kind of got us into the mood, right? Yeah. Of a little fear. Roll it.
That he did, Bob, is that the president really has never done a full-length interview on this subject. It's always been a little bit of a hot potato. They've been worried, about taking any attention away from jobs, and so I think the importance of this is threefold. First of all, there's no one who can change the conversation in the country, as you know, more than the president. And I'm a big believer to name something is to own it. If you can name an issue, you can own the issue. And for so long, green, was really named by the people who hated it. And they named it liberal, sissy, girly man, unpatriotic, vaguely French. What Obama is doing in this interview, and I think with his EPA regulations, is renaming green. He's naming it geostrategic, geoeconomic, innovative, patriotic. And he made two big points in the interview that I think begin a whole different discussion. One is the International Energy Agency in 2012 came out with a study that said we basically have to keep roughly 2/3 of proven oil reserves, oil and gas, in the ground because we can't exploit them. Otherwise, we're going to burn up the planet. The president talked about that, and he agrees with that assessment. Over time, we got to make that transition. And the other, he said, I'm for a price on carbon.
Okay, now a couple things. Obviously, that went to the review between Tom Friedman and Bob Schieffer, CBS News and Face the Nation. But a couple things, Chris, that jumped out at me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, naming the Green Movement somehow that it was what he said, sissy in
Yeah.
French.
You know, that is, well, I had to bite my tongue when he said girly man.
That's all.
Let me point this out though. It's misleading what he said, because there were a number of, it's kind of like the Obamacare is a negative thing, even though there
Yeah.
have been a number of examples where the president says I do care, and people have thrown that back at them and said the president wants it to be called Obamacare. He's fine with it. There's been a number of left of center individuals, people of various faiths, who have referred to that as green, and they liked it and referred to that. So nobody came up with this. People in a smoke-filled room, dimly lit, that a bunch of elephants sitting around didn't come up with the green movement terminology. So that's a little misleading. He talked about how the president hasn't really talked about this because it's been a hot potato issue.
Yeah.
Certainly, he's a lame duck. He's not going to lose his seat for talking about it. So, maybe no surprise that the president would be sitting around talking about it now. And he said also the president didn't want to lose attention or turn attention away from jobs. And certainly a number of individuals, center-right mostly, have said this president doesn't do enough about jobs. So someone is likely to point that out and say, well, the president hasn't been spending enough time about jobs. So I talked with Dan Celia today.
The man.
Yeah, Dan the man. I
What do you
talked
have
with
to
Dan
say?
today about Obama's pay-as-you-go extension, the student loan issue that was in the news earlier this week. And Dan said the president could be doing more to actually help people just graduating from college, or maybe have just graduated from college in recent years, which is what this program would affect. Dan seems to think the president would be doing them a better service by doing various things, along with Congress, of course, to help create jobs for those folks. Because the young Americans are vastly unemployed, they're underemployed, and the numbers are worse than what the government is actually reporting, depending on who you ask.
Hold on, and by the way, obviously, we're going 2 segments now.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
hope that's okay. All right, so you're going to stick with us.
That's
right?
fine,
Okay,
yeah.
but Dan talking crazy talk. I mean, he's saying that jobs would be more of a better remedy than government subsidizing loans. I mean,
Yes, and
really?
if you want to tease, listen to the news tomorrow for more of what Dan said. Suspenseful music builds.
I know, but
But,
what I love about Dan is there's no nonsense.
No.
He's calling it out. He's like, okay, if you really want to help, and then he breaks it down.
Yeah,
and
I
it's
feel
great
like
stuff.
I need like a drink of water and, to sit in the corner and somebody like cuts my eye like a boxer does after sometimes I go in there and ask Dan some questions. But he's a knowledgeable individual.
He is a knowledgeable individual, and it's one of the many reasons, but to lock it in, and that's why we call him Dan the Man, but he's calling him out on that, and good for him, and he's breaking it down. Now here's my other question. Do you think Tom Friedman is a dope head? And here's why I ask. How can you be that out of touch with and be so authoritative in the delivery of what you've just said when you basically have accused the vast right-wing conspiracy of coming up with the idea of the green jobs and demonizing it and praising a lame duck president for doing something and saying something that he tried to do legislatively, which was put a price on carbon through cap and trade?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, am I wrong? Should I sit there and say, wow, this guy, everybody tells me genius Tom Friedman is.
Yeah.
What am I missing?
Based on his tone, the
Yes.
things he said in the clip there where he was talking about his interview with President Obama, our
Yeah.
president.
Our president.
Based on his tone and the things he said, he really wants something done about this issue that he very apparently deeply cares about, and certainly I think maybe that kind of has gotten in the way of some things.
Every time they care about something, they want to take away my liberty
Well,
and
yeah.
accuse me of wanting to pollute the water or
Yeah,
being.
yeah. And Christians will tell you that we want to be good stewards. Certainly, we're told to be good stewards and take care of things.
Dominion.
The issue that they want versus how Christians and center right individuals see things is debatable. and there's not really a debate because it's kind of like this my way or the highway situation. And as far as helping out the poor in poor areas, there are some groups that mention really what individuals and governments are trying to do is kind of a redistribution of wealth, which is getting off on a whole nother issue that.
Well, I
maybe
think we're going to
doesn't
address
benefit
that
the poor.
issue, actually, because we're going to be speaking about the minimum wage. Boring is not when you find out who's coming out in support of the minimum wage. This reminds me of the insurance companies that were in support of Obamacare.
Sure.
Really myopic, short-sighted, and we will have more with our good friend Chris Woodward. What's your Twitter, man?
Oh, thanks. You can find me on Twitter at AFNC Woodward, and One News Now is at One News Now COM.
Okay. Another tease for you
Sure.
for the next segment. Find out what Ed Henry asked Josh Earnest. You all liked it big time. Chris will comment on it. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk.